Now, this is actually why I have produced a lot of haters and malefactors against me, because I reveal the truth. Suction, the production to produce a vacuum by the removal of air. To what? Force fluid into a vacant space. The vacant space is the vacuum. Or to procure adhesion, like with a suction cup. It is not outside pressure pushing the suction cup against the surface it procures adhesion to, but it is the production of a vacuum by the removal of air. When you push the suction cup down, you disperse the air out of it. To force fluid or matter into a vacant space or procure adhesion, like with a suction cup. Suction, remove something using suction. Physicians used a tube to suction out the gallstones. Outside pressure didn't come from down and around and push the gallstones up the tube. No, suction procured adhesion and sucked the gallstones up into the tube. And when I upload videos where science inadvertently admits the same, they get very, very upset. So again, we are on Google. The dictionary, the word in question is suction. The production to produce a vacuum. How? By the removal of air. To what? In order to force fluid or matter, the gallstones are matter, into a vacant space. Or procure adhesion, like with a suction cup. Now let's use logic. Suction. The production of a vacuum. You produced a vacuum by the removal of air. In order to what? To force fluid or matter into the vacuum, the vacant space. The gallstones get sucked up per suction into the vacuum, the vacant space. And they really dislike it when you show things that contradict their model. I do this because we are taught that the earth, covered and smothered in gas and oxygen in its entirety, is not only next to and surrounded by, but within an infinite and expanding vacuum universe, billions of light years across. But in this case, the vacuum doesn't suck. It doesn't create suction. But in every other case on Earth, a vacuum creates suction. Suction, the production to produce a vacuum by the removal of air. That's how you make a vacuum, in order to force fluid or matter into the vacant space. The gallstones are forced into the vacant space by suction. The vacant space is the vacuum. Now all you got to do is go over this with logic or Google suction yourself, and you will see. Now here is where science inadvertently admits the same. Now here they're talking about an aquatic species, an underwater plant, that uses suction, a vacuum, to suck in its prey. This is a negative pressure differential, which is the definition of a vacuum. Now take a listen. Use logic and realize the truth.
Found all over the world, the bladderwort is officially known as utricularia, or little bag in Latin. And the name makes a lot of sense. On the branches of this aquatic plant are tiny bladder-like bags that double as prey traps. When not in use, these bladders are empty, and a negative pressure differential exists within the space. Tiny hairs line the entrance to the trap door, and when tiny swimming insects like fleas or water lice get too close, the trap door swings open, sucking water into the bladder at 4 meters per second. When not in use, these bladders are empty, and a negative pressure differential exists within the space.
Now, that negative pressure differential that exists within the space is the vacuum, a mini vacuum. And that vacuum produces suction. It cannot be any clearer than that. They inadvertently admit the truth. Why is that so hard to understand? Because it debunks your model. It debunks outer space. If outer space were an infinite and expanding negative pressure differential billions of light years across, it would produce massive suction that would relieve the Earth of all its gas and oxygen. Now take a listen again.
When not in use, these bladders are empty, and a negative pressure differential exists within the space. Tiny hairs line the entrance to the trap door, and when tiny swimming insects like fleas or water lice get too close, the trap door swings open, sucking water into the bladder at 4 meters per second.
That's correct. Sucking water, producing suction. Now, do we need to go back to the definition of suction, to the part to force fluid or matter into the vacant space? The bladder that he just mentioned is a negative pressure differential in the space. That is the mini vacuum. The door opens and the matter, the water, the fluid is sucked in with the prey. It cannot be any clearer. Let's review.
Traps. When not in use, these bladders are empty, and a negative pressure differential exists within the space. Tiny hairs line the entrance to the trap door, and when tiny swimming insects like fleas or water lice get too close, the trap door swings open, sucking water into the bladder at 4 meters per second.
Let's hear that again. Oops.
Prey traps. When not in use, these bladders are empty, and a negative pressure differential exists within the space. Tiny hairs line the entrance to the trap door, and when tiny swimming insects like fleas or water lice get too close, the trap door swings open, sucking water into the bladder at 4 meters per second.
Now, suction, the production to produce a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter into the vacant space. The bladder wart is a negative pressure differential in the space that produces suction that when any prey animal, the lice or the animals that mentioned get too close, they get sucked into the vacant space. Right here. That is suction, or to procure adhesion like with a suction cup. It is not outside pressure pushing the suction cup anywhere, but it is to procure adhesion, the production of a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter into a vacant space or procure adhesion. It does not mention outside pressure pushing on anything to procure adhesion, but a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid into a vacant space or procure adhesion. Now, when I say fluid or matter, it also sucks matter. Well, what does it say there? Physicians used a tube to suction out the gallstones to remove something using suction. Suction is real. It's produced by a vacuum. And they inadvertently tell you this because they have to. It's a fact. It can be demonstrated. I've done so to furious reviews, but don't blame me. This is true scientific physics that can be demonstrated. And when I put the suction cup on the scale and the suction cup only weighs 10 grams, then when I create the vacuum and procures adhesion to the top of that scale, it still only weighs 10 grams. There is no change. The only change is when I create the vacuum to procure adhesion. This is a fact of entropic law and suction. It is a fact that if outer space were an infinite and expanding negative pressure differential, an infinite vacuum billions of light years across, it would produce massive suction that would remove all gas, oxygen, liquid, and matter. If in reality, the truth, the whole earth would probably explode in all directions to fill the empty, the vacant space. And then they tell us that burning balls of gas, helium, and this and that can do so surrounded by and within an infinite vacuum universe. My friends, I implore you to wake up. I am a victim of this too. We have been systematically dumbed down and programmed to instantaneously believe, memorize, and regurgitate nonsense that is not true. It is theatrics based on philosophical grounds because they do not want the earth or man to ever be considered special. They want you to believe the earth, amongst millions of planets and billions of galaxies, is insignificant, and that at some time or point, superior aliens will show up, to the point where they even teach that the aliens seeded us here. They will go to any length to not address a creator. They believe in evolution. Evolution is debunked by the second law of thermodynamics. You cannot get order from disorder. Chaos cannot produce order. That is a law. You can only get chaos from order that breaks down. Okay? Hot water will turn cold. Things break down, rust, corrode, and erode. They break down unless you intervene. This is a fact. Outer space is very entertaining. I love science fiction movies still. But I know it's not true. Whatever is beyond the sky of the earth is definitely not an infinite and expanding negative pressure differential infinite vacuum universe. All the gas and oxygen would fill the space. That's what gas and oxygen do. They disperse and expand in all directions. That's why you need a container to produce and achieve gas pressure. You cannot do so. They will use a container to show you pressure and then try to say that all the gas and oxygen outside is not in any container, but it stays with the earth. We cannot demonstrate that. The only way you can get gas and oxygen to stay in one place is to put it in a container. The physical walls of the container stop that gas and oxygen from expanding. They bounce and hit and press into the physical walls of the container. So all true scientific physical laws that can be demonstrated, their model always contradicts it, and they interject with gravity. Gravity, their magical force power thing that they now have to admit. However, if we are to be honest, we don't know what gravity is itself in any fundamental way. Well, logic would state that you cannot go on and turn around to assign it to all these different things if you don't know what it is itself. And why don't they know what it is itself? Well, they also admit that gravity isn't physical. It's not a thing. It has no presence or substance of itself. Therefore, it is impossible for it itself to interact with anything that is physical. Do you not understand that? If something isn't physical, it's not tangible. It isn't real. Now, for the gravity citations that I just cited, I will probably put them under the video so that you can go look and verify what I say is true. I get it off Google. You just have to ask Google the right question. Google, what don't we know about gravity? And they will have to tell you. They will never volunteer this information. You have to dig. So when you ask Google, what don't we know about gravity? Up comes, however, if we are to be honest, we don't know what gravity is itself in any fundamental way. And that's because they There's no presence in substance of gravity itself to directly detect, identify, isolate, or harness. They can only go on with their assumption and supposition, i.e., we only know how it behaves. So go ahead and make your fun and resist. But the truth is the truth, no matter what you say. Don't hate me, hate real science.